There you go. It's 2 minutes past 2. And this is actually a special meeting of the Turlock Subbasin Groundwater Sustainability Agency. Remember, we doing the kind of ground rules type stuff in terms of Zoom, or are we just going to jump into our normal meeting?
I don't know. I never gave that thought, Michael. I guess I could run through the stuff that I know from my memory.
Perfect.
Yeah. Yeah, of course, none of us are new to Zoom or virtual meetings, but go on mute, please, unless you wish to talk. Unmute yourself when you do want to speak. Try not to put the call on hold. And then it looks like everyone's names are here in the participants list, but if you're calling from a cell phone and your name's not listed in there and you speak, it'd be good to let us know who is talking, but I don't think that will be a problem. And if anybody, and I'm also trying to see if there's anybody, or if it hasn't been involved in the project, that are members of the public. If anybody wants to speak, we'll get to that as well. Plenty of chance for input. And then the meeting agenda, which you see up on your screen, is posted on the turlockgroundwater.org website. And I think that's pretty much it, Michael, unless I missed anything. But I'll just kind of let you take it from there.
And just as a note says, we're holding this meeting pursuant to the Executive Order N-29-20, which allows us to hold conference calls based on the ongoing pandemic. Okay, so this time it's 2:03. We'll call this meeting to order of the West Turlock Subbasin Groundwater Sustainability Agency. I'll do a roll call just to see if we have a quorum. Not that we're taking any actions today, but just for our record keeping. So who do we have from the Turlock Irrigation District, apart from me?
I'm here as well, Debbie Beakersbach.
Wonderful. Hey, Debbie.
Bill Penny is here.
Bill.
Bill Gobey.
Two hers there as well.
Okay, anyone from Stanislaus County? And anyone from Merced County?
Yeah, you got Brody Patterson here.
Hey, Brody. Series? Turlock, City of Turlock? City of Modesto?
Miguel Alvarez.
Hey, Miguel.
How you doing, Michael?
Good, thank you. Daenerys CSD?
David Odom with Daenerys CSD is here.
Hey, dude. Anyone from Keys CSD?
Michelle from Keys CSD is here.
Hey, Michelle.
Hello.
Hillmore County Water District?
Curtis is here.
Hey, Curtis. Got some Bee Gees or something on there. Leandro from Delhi? Nope. So I got the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I have 6 agencies is what I have. So I don't actually have a quorum. No, we're taking the action items, but that'll be reflected in the minutes. Do we have anybody from the East Turlock Subbasin here? Kevin?
Hi, Michael. How are you?
Very good, thank you. How you doing, Kevin?
Looking good. Good that you got your video on. Yeah, I see we got Brody and Dennis and myself, so we've got a quorum on the east side. So I'll call that meeting to order at whatever time it is.
Okay.
2:05.
Herb, can you scroll down a little bit, please? There we go. Okay. So our objective today for the special workshop is to successfully launch the Groundwater Recharge Assessment Tool in coordination with the West Turlock and East Turlock Groundwater Sustainability Agencies at both their technical advisory committees. So at this time, let's do introductions and maybe have the GRAT team go first. That would be great.
Daniel, did you want to go or should you want me to go?
Why don't you go ahead, Glenn, since you've been leading this?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Glenn Lowe. I work for an environmental data nonprofit called the Earth Genome, and we've been involved with GRAT for several years. Earth Genome and Sustainable Conservation helped co-create GRAT about 4+ years ago, and I'm excited to be here in the meeting. Claire?
And I'm Daniel Mountjoy with Sustainable Conservation. and as a co-developer of GRAT, but also working for the organization's worked in the Valley for over 26 years with agriculture, finding solutions to environmental problems that make business sense.
I'll jump in here also. I'm on the Earth Genome team, Claire Keating, and I'm a project manager. Be working with you all, hopefully.
I'm Taylor
and my colleagues.
I'm a project manager at Sustainable Conservation, working on GRAT partnerships and also on spatial and data needs.
Hi everyone, I'm Larry Askill, Senior Agronomist with Sustainable Conservation. I provide input into the model on crop compatibility and a number of other aspects.
And that's it from our team.
Hey, Chris from Blue Raster, do you want to do a quick intro?
Sure. Thanks, Glenn. Chris Gabris with Blue Raster. We work with Glenn and Sustainable Conservation as well. I'm the project manager, and we help build the web application and the GIS data behind the tool.
For my edification, there's a team of Earth Genome, Sustainable Conservation, and Blue Raster. Can somebody just in 1 or 2 minutes just explain the three partners, what the roles are, what they will do? I think that would help.
Sure.
Yeah. Daniel, why don't you take the pass at that?
Yeah, so we have, Sustainable Conservation has been the on-the-ground partner in the Valley, working with irrigation districts and farmers around recharge. So we typically are the ones that have built the local knowledge around the recharge piece, and then we've partnered with Earth Genome as the data and resource technology part of the team to put together a decision support tool. And then Blue Raster is our technical support partner to help actually code and build the tool. So it's all three pieces are essential, and yeah, I think you'll hear more about that during our presentations. Glenn, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, the only thing I'd add, that was spot on, Daniel. Earth Genome does a lot of work on water data throughout California, both with DWR and the State Water Board. So we add that angle of just trying to connect all the dots with all the different data sets.
That was really good. Glenn, thank you for that. So let's move on to number 2, because the members of the Western Turlock Subbasins introduced themselves at the beginning. Let's go behind the intent behind using the GRAT. From a little bit that I understand, obviously, GRAT is looking at opportunities to recharge the aquifer, finding locations where we can percolate water. So it's a combination of finding water, conveying that water, getting good locations where it would percolate and stay around, and then finding ways to get that water back out of the ground. So as we start looking at management actions and projects and programs in our GSP, we can use the GRAT to help inform us of good locations for kind of groundwater banking and recharge projects. But with that, I'd like to hand it over to Debbie and maybe Liz to add a little bit more.
So thank you, Michael. I don't have a lot to add over what you've kind of said, which is great. You know, this is a project that is funded through a Prop 68 grant that the GSAs have received from the state of California. So I want to make sure we recognize that. And we're very grateful for the support as we move through our GSP process. The project is designed to help us with identifying and prioritizing potential recharge projects and opportunities within the subbasin as we develop our groundwater sustainability plan. But also in the future, as we begin to implement the plan or the GSP and identify new projects and build new projects and other things, we may find that we can use the GRAT, or the Groundwater Recharge Assessment Tool, in operating those facilities as well. And so it's going to be a tool that I think can grow with us as we move through our SGMA work over the next 20 years. Keep that in mind, and I think the Sustainable Conservation and Earth Genome team are going to talk a little bit about some of that as well. So that's all I had. Liz, did you want to add anything else?
Sure. Well, I agree with everything you said, and one thing I just did want to highlight was that, you know, we are developing this right now with funding that we got from round 3 from GWR for the GSP. But like Debbie said, we're going to be using this to help screen and pick projects for the GSP, but it's also a tool that will continue on after January 2022, after the GSP is due. And the subbasin will be able to use this tool to continue to evaluate potential recharge projects in the subbasin. So we think this will have a kind of a lasting benefit to the subbasin.
Okay, so
Shall I go ahead?
Yeah, you have a question?
I know this is Daniel. I was just wondering if you wanted me to go on with start with the demonstration at this point.
That'd be fantastic. Daniel, what's number 3, GRAT demonstration?
Very good. So I'll share my screen. I guess we'll have to take the agenda down if you don't mind, and I can share some slides with you.
Yep, I'm going to do that right now. Sit tight.
Okay. All right. Great. So share that. Okay. So let me know if you can see the screen. Okay, great. So what I'm going to start out with is share with you a little bit about the sort of the origins of GRAT, give you a demonstration of how the tool actually runs, and then talk about some of the use cases for some of the other irrigation districts that are using GRAT to give you a sense of what it can be for you. And then Glenn will pick it up and start talking about the local application of it. We were starting to talk with irrigation districts back really at the early days of SGMA about some of their questions and what they were thinking around SGMA planning needs. And the questions we were hearing from the districts that we were working with closely on actual doing recharge in their districts were these around: where is the best place to do the recharge? What's the best timing for it? How much water can you actually capture of the available surface water? At what cost? And ultimately, what percentage of your groundwater overdraft can be addressed by increasing recharge? So working with the Madera Irrigation District and the Tulare Irrigation District as our project partners in developing GRAT, we designed the tool to meet their needs, to ask these key questions about what's the cost-effective optimal combination of recharge using canals, dedicated basins, and farmland to maximize capture of available water. We'd already been working with irrigation districts and with farmers on different methods of recharge, whether it be fallow land shown in the middle here or through their recharge basins, or actually putting on active farmland such as this vineyard, to figure out how much water could you put on these crops without causing harm. And so our agronomist Lottie Asgill on the call here I'll talk about some of the results of those on-farm work that led to informing this tool. As we think about what are all the factors that have to be considered to answer those key questions, I'm going to walk through them really briefly to show you sort of the range of topics. The first one is the water available for recharge. And as you're all aware, it's not consistently available. So it's a question of temporal availability and how much water can you capture in certain years and versus others. And so these wettest years are the most critical in terms of how much of that water can you capture and where are you going to be able to put it. There's also within year variability over the course of the months, and also considering the use of canals already being fully occupied for irrigation delivery. So what amount of water can we move given those other demands on the infrastructure to put it out in the field? So GRAT takes both that annual variability and the or annual monthly or actually weekly variability to think about where you can put that water. It then looks at what's your capacity to move it both through district canals, such as your canals here on the left, and through turnouts onto farms or into recharge basins that you might be planning or considering. So both of those become bottlenecks if they don't have the capacity to move those peak year flows. We then need to think about where can you put it in terms of site suitability. And many folks are aware of the UC Davis's SAGBL index, which focuses on soil suitability and is able to tell us which fields, which lands down to 6 feet have the capacity to move water quickly. But below that, there's some really critical factors around clay layers and depth to groundwater in terms of how much can you store and how much transmissivity is there to move that water into those aquifers. And GRAT used Land IQ, another consulting firm's Recharge Suitability Index, to inform that. But what you're going to hear a little more today is we're going to refine that for the Turlock Basin based on how groundwater's more localized data. But we have this available for sites throughout the Central Valley. When we start to overlay the capacity of the canal system with the site suitability, then we really start to get the sense of where are the best sites and where can we actually put the water rather than simply what's possible. So GRAT does both the spatial overlay of these conditions of delivering the water, site suitability, and then the the temporal aspect of when is that water available and when are those sites actually available given cropping and canal capacity at any given week of the year. Crop compatibility has been a real big challenge for those that are considering doing recharge on farmland. And I'll just say that farmland offers us our greatest volume of capacity because it's so extensive in these districts. But there's a lot of concern from farmers about the what kind of effects that might have on their crop suitability or crop health. And what Lottie's been doing is interviewing farmers, and we've been doing data collection and monitoring of a number of sites throughout the valley. And that combined with other research done by UC Davis is starting to fill in some of those gaps around what months, which weeks can you actually put water on which crops. And so we've developed a calendar of best available data from these field experiments as well as field interviews for these crops listed below as major permanent crops as well as fallow lands. And all of this, of course, the bottom line comes down to dollars and how much it costs to do these different types of recharge. So GRAT includes the cost of on-farm recharge, which is really the cost to the grower of preparing the field, managing the water, making sure that it doesn't flood into the neighbor's fields, and those variable costs within that, or the cost of new dedicated recharge basins or operating basins, which takes land out of production, but has much more capacity to put a lot of water in a very short period of time. So all of those costs that we've been collecting and doing economic studies on are built into GRAT. So how GRAT actually works then is takes that site suitability information along with the crop information and ranks every field within your district's capacity to move water there. So every place that touches an irrigation canal gets ranked based on those conditions. The user defines the water available for recharge, and we'll talk more about that, but looking at your historic water availability when it's not already being used for irrigation, or projected future water availability based on climate change projections. It allows you to set up your own water availability schedule for the future. We take that water then and run it through the canal system, taking consideration for the capacity of turnout at each field, and then apply that water for 52 weeks of the year over 20 years through all those different fields, figuring out which ones are available in any given week. And we get the weekly recharge by field through GRAT and a number of reporting formats for reporting that information back to you so you can evaluate whether it meets your cost criteria or your priorities for where it's going. Any unused water is also reported back in terms of, is there more capacity, more potential to capture more water if you had the infrastructure to do so. It's a cloud-based access tool. We've built it for these 3 irrigation districts so far. We're right now have built it out for Merced Irrigation District as well in a non-user interface format. It's more for study purposes, but all of these three work very similarly, and this is what we're proposing to set up for you. So I'm going to give you a demonstration right now of how it actually works, showing you the Madeira case, and give you a sense of, once all that information is loaded into the system, what does the tool actually look like and how does it function? This is the user interface. It's, as I said, cloud-based. You don't have to have any special software on your computer. All of the fields within your district will be mapped, and you'll be able to take a look at your district boundaries, turn them on and off, and your canal system can be turned on and off to see where the fields are. And I'll just also point out that all those fields are ranked in these three color codes here at the top, based on those criteria I talked about earlier between crop compatibility and site suitability. So within the district, each field has a different ranking right from the start in terms of its being a good location for recharge. As I talked about before, you set how much water is available. And so what you essentially have is this user interface where you set how much water is typically available in wet, above normal, below normal, dry, and critical type years. These are all editable fields. And then you project how many wet years or dry years do you expect to see over the course of the 20-year SGMA process. If you expect you might have 3 or 4 year droughts, you can plug those in. You can put in the atmospheric river years as frequently as you think they might be happening in any other intervening years. And you can set it as easily as what I just did to play different scenarios of how much water there's available and how much of it could you capture. You also have the choice to select or turn off on-farm recharge, fallow land recharge, or existing recharge basins, or propose new recharge basins that you might be considering building or constructing. I'm going to turn off the proposed ones for this scenario and just show you the comparison of the three available recharge methods. Within the on-farm recharge, you can also turn on and off different crops. If your growers tell you there's no way in hell that we're going to recharge our almonds, you can turn off all the almonds and play out that scenario. Next, what you do is actually enter then how much water you want to run in your different scenarios. So if we go back up here and say your wettest year is 150,000 acre feet, then you would plug in here that you want to see on the wettest year, how much water could you recharge? So remember, what it's going to do now is take water availability across 52 weeks of the year and find out where we can put that water given the crop cycles and crop timing. So I just pushed run, and in a matter of a few seconds, it selected 1,148 sites, ranked them in order of which ones should be filled first if you had that water. And in this case, all the dedicated recharge basins in Madeira were prioritized first, and then fallow lands were received second. And then you start to see some walnuts interspersed, an almond orchard, and different crops then start to get interspersed based on that initial ranking that we talked about. For any one of these, as a district manager, you could click on it and see, in the case of their district basins, this is a fallow recharge fields, or not a basin, this is just a recharge basin. It's a 10-acre site. It would cost $1,118 to do the recharge in the wettest year and yield 260 acre feet of recharge. What GRAT's doing is filling up each of these in sequential order and seeing if there's still water left that week until it runs out of sites. And essentially it came down here to this final pistachio field and said that this field was the last one to be filled. You can go through and remove sites. If this grower says, I'm not interested, you simply click remove, and that site will be taken off the options list. Similarly, you could build a list of sites of interested growers or of your recharge basins and sequentially or add them in and see how much you could recharge with those sites. The resulting data then is very informative for your GSP to see if you maximized all of those 1,100 sites in this scenario we just ran, how much recharge would you get from all of those sites over the 20 years, given that the wettest year was the 150,000 acre feet. And this compares what would happen to your groundwater over the 20 years without any supplemental recharge, and then shows the difference with that scenario I just ran. And what you see is you're reducing your groundwater deficit, but not achieving SGMA goals of going back to historic 2015 levels. We can change the recharge scenarios back in the scenario up here, or selecting different fields, or adding new recharge basins. The goal you want to see is actually getting this line, that lower line, to flatten out. And if you can't flatten it out, unfortunately, it means you're going to need to be thinking about groundwater pumping reductions. So you can also play with reductions in groundwater pumping, such as entering here a different pumping allocation, and seeing that you actually end up having a few of those wettest years having a net gain in recharge, and your groundwater balance starts to flatten out. This is a way through, yeah.
Can I ask a question? So that line chart over there, is that's basically change in storage type of thing?
Correct.
Okay.
Right,
Right.
Assuming no other changes in terms of water introductions.
Okay.
So it gives you an objective way to play with different scenarios around pumping restrictions versus increased recharge, which really are your two levers to work with. And we hope this will give you, in your GSP planning process, a chance to talk about, how many new projects would you need to raise this recharge level up and minimize your pumping restrictions. And again, these numbers are arbitrary. You have to set your own groundwater pumping levels. You have to set your own depletion levels based on your initial inventory in your GSP.
So,
for any one of these, yeah.
I'm sorry, just two quick questions. So you're using 52 weeks. Can that be changed, or does it need to be 52 weeks?
Good question. I can go up here into the criteria selection option, and right now it's set for all 52 weeks. A lot of districts are feeling like their growers are not going to take water past March,
right.
So they can set it. They can set it back to November to March time period. We go right back in here and run it again, and see where you end up. And now there's only 378 sites available, so a significant reduction in reducing that timing of water availability. Actually, I need to check today. Yeah, that stayed the same. Yeah. So depending on the different criteria you choose to set based on that time period, that's one way to adjust it.
Thank you.
Yeah. You can look at how much recharge by type was accomplished. In this case, in Madera, they've got a number of existing dedicated recharge basins showing up in the black. On-farm recharge, though, is a significant additional benefit. Canal seepage, though, in most districts is a significant source of recharge. And that's an important piece to think about, because it's even the fact that you're loading up those canals to get the water out for the recharge season, you're accomplishing a lot of benefit just out of loading the canals, unless they're lined, which I know a lot of your canals are lined. And then we can also do other diagnostics around how much of the acreage was used for each crop. Now we're still constrained by that winter period right now, and it shows that we only used a small amount of the almond and grape acreage. Much of that in black was not actually used during that time period. And we can also look at unused water that was not captured. And in that wettest year scenario, there was still 123 acre feet of water that didn't get captured in that scenario. So that's a clue that new infrastructure or new recharge facilities may be needed to start to capture that water. But it allows you to run those different tests. And then ultimately the financials are the question of what's it going to cost you in terms of the GSA thinking about allocation or funding strategies. We can look at the cost per acre foot for each of the different recharge types, which is fairly much set by the cost of each of those methods. but over the 20 years, you can see how much is actually being used of each of those. And then on an annual basis, what the cost would be. So those drought years, there was no cost to the district because there was no delivery. But any years, when those wettest years, the costs were higher because of the longer period of delivery and management. So all of those are costs that you can build in to assess your local costs and determine what these different options would cost you, including net present value of the overall 20-year SGMA compliance period, how much is going to be both in terms of the 20-year investment and the net present value of that. And then all of this can be put into an output file listing all the growers, and Madeira is doing this with, what they do is do a sign up of growers to see who's willing to do recharge. They then plug in all those growers and see how much each of them is able to recharge and determine which growers they want to provide the water to first in terms of maximum benefit. In Tulare Irrigation District, they have growers sign up and they to forego planting winter wheat, for instance, and they can see then how much each of those farmers can recharge and determine which ones are going to be the most cost effective for them to pay a rental rate to those farmers to forego planting that crop and net the best return on investment to the GSA or to the district. So there's a number of things you can do with this kind of output information. So I will stop the presentation of that and just briefly show you one more thing on I wanted to share with you in terms of the other use cases. In Merced, in particular, I wanted to show you the use case that they're using this to evaluate infrastructure capacity. And then in Madeira, we'll talk about evaluating the potential of in the GSP. In Merced, this is one of the maps showing the compatible crop acreage within the district where recharge can occur. When we actually run some of the scenarios over in their case, we're running it for 100 years, but imagine this in 20 years. It shows us the average acre foot applied per acre and the distribution across the district. This input then is turned into an output file to the groundwater model for the local consultant and is able to then see where did the most recharge occur within the basin. And this is really important if you have established in your GSP some management goals for replenishing certain areas within the district, whether it be filling the most depleted areas or ensuring water for disadvantaged communities or for groundwater dependent ecosystems. You can figure out where that water actually went. And if it's not going where you want it, one of the things we've produced is a canal limitations map showing the number of days over that 100-year period in which the canal was unable to deliver water, and GRAT had to reallocate that water to a different part of the district because the canal was simply too small. And so you see 547 days, 523 days, all of these dots are showing significant blockage or lack of capacity, whereas the blue dots meant there was never a day that they couldn't move the water past that location. So if you had a location out here that you really wanted to see replenished, this would indicate some canal investment infrastructure costs to move more water to that area. And then the last use case in Madeira, in their case, they're a critically overdrafted basin, so they actually developed their GSP, and their consultants had estimated initial groundwater recharge would be in the order of 510 average acre feet per year. And that was assuming 1,250 acre feet in wet years, 500 in normal years, and then looking at the distribution of water year types to come up with 510 acre feet per year average. We were able to take that and then look at actual delivery in 2019 with the farmers that had volunteered to take water. So the GSP, and 2017, I should say, also in terms of actual experience. So the GSP showed fairly small amounts of water delivery. Actual delivered water to farmers who voluntarily took it without any incentive other than it was free water from the district was significantly more. And even when we subtract evapotranspiration out of that delivered water, we found that there was 3.4 times more water recharged than what the GSP had been predicting. So we also wanted to compare that with GRAT to make sure that GRAT is giving a reasonable expectation. So in this scenario, or this table, GSP said 510 average annual initially. The GSP suggested over the 20-year period of SGMA implementation, they would get up to 2,000 acre feet average annual. So we ran GRAT with all of their assumptions of participation numbers and water availability and frequency of water year, and we came up with a very similar number of 2,200. We then looked at the actual recharge they achieved in 2019 and 2017, and as I said, that was 3.4 times the GSP amount. We came up with very similar, just using that same multiplier, they would probably get 7,000 if they kept going at the same rate of adoption by their farmers. When we plugged it into GRAT to look at all possible fields, if everybody participated, we can see a much larger potential. Not that this is necessarily going to be accepted by all the farmers, but it does start to suggest that if you offer incentives to farmers rather than just free water, if you actually encourage them with payment rather than building new basins, you could get up to significantly more than what the GSP was suggesting. But this kind of number is what the GRAT is designed to help the district evaluate and work with. Adjust the assumptions, adjust the water year types, and see if you actually can get to this potential based on acceptability within the district and engagement with your stakeholders. So I will stop there. I'm guessing there's a few questions, and then we need to decide, Glenn, how the time goes, or Michael, in terms of let you decide what's next.
Yeah. Are there questions, reactions to what Daniel was saying? I know no two regions are the same, no two subbasins are the same, so there's always the question of how applicable is the tool and such, but that's really what we're looking to do in the next 6 months, is make a tool that's really local and relevant for you.
Yeah, Glenn and Daniel in particular, thanks for the presentation. I just want to make clear a couple of things Daniel said, just to be clear of terminology. So you talked about the district, but we're looking to recharge the entire sub-basin, not just each individual district. And there are, for instance, Turlock Irrigation District has facilities that are outside of its district that could be used as part of this, conveyance infrastructure if everything falls into place. So I just want the crowd to know this is a basin-wide approach, and we'll figure out how to do things to the advantage of everybody.
Yeah, Michael, very well said. And in fact, could I use that as a segue to the next section and share my screen? It's exactly.
Looks like you already did, so go ahead.
Yeah, well, you were such a perfect segue. I need to thank you for that. Let me go full screen. It's exactly as you just described. We're super excited about this because this is the first time where we're working across multiple different organizations, and that has such wonderful potential and is clearly the spirit behind SGMA, clearly the spirit behind both the West and East Turlock Subbasin GSAs working together so collaboratively. And we see it as pretty simply, this is a tool that helps with sustainable groundwater management, exactly like you, Debbie, and Liz said in terms of project and management actions. But really, we see it as a common tool, a shared tool that anyone could use within the GSAs. And our hope, of course, is that regional collaboration, because who has the water, who has the facilities, who has ground that is suitable for that, where are the specific areas of the subbasin that are of greatest need? We know that's a big puzzle, what we call a spatial temporal puzzle, but kind of a where-when puzzle. And our goal is to allow you to put your data in one application and be able to see and do those scenarios, the optimizations that Daniel mentioned. And for us, the optimization, of course, isn't just, hey, where is there the biggest overdraft of water? Because we know there are many other benefits that we're really trying to optimize. So many people are focused on disadvantaged areas or communities. And so as we think about how the tool is built over the next 6 months, we really want your input and feedback on what is unique to the Turlock Subbasin, so that when you are having and be able to use the tool, you're being able to optimize the where and when unique for your situation. That's really the key. Of course, everyone always asks, okay, great, but what data do we need to provide to be able to be integrated, to have that integrated view? And so this is a quick summary of the data, and we work hand in hand with you to produce this data. Sometimes districts have it really readily available, kind of off the shelf. Sometimes it's in-depth conversations with the water master who's managed and operated the system for the last 30, 40 years. But really it's the specifics of the actual subbasin. So a lot of the stuff that Daniel was showing, that's a key part of making sure we try and kind of embody the spirit of water master. We want the tool to approximate as closely as possible how you actually run the district, and in this case, multiple districts or cities, communities that are involved in the Turlock Subbasin. The water available for recharge is, of course, that supply that Daniel was mentioning. You have to know how much water can be placed, the suitability as well. Liz from Todd Groundwater, I'm going to hand over the reins to her in just 30 seconds, because she's going to talk a little bit about how we're using local data to make the where optimization much, much better than we've ever had a chance to before. We're super excited about that. And of course, the financial data that is usually, every decision is a financial decision, as we know. And so we want to put things in financial terms so you guys can make the best investments. A really important question I often get asked is, okay, how the data is sensitive. You know, some of this data is, you know, it's not public data. And so just to reassure everyone, as Daniel showed in the demo, everything is password protected. In this particular example, with multiple agencies, districts, communities, we should all agree on what data is available for everyone to see or not see, just to honor what is proprietary data. So that's a conversation we'll want to have with you over the next 6 months, just to make sure we get that exactly right. So let me pause there, because I know, Liz, I think you were going to share a couple slides, because the work that Todd is going to do to make it even more local is super exciting.
Yes, thanks, Glenn. I'm going to share my screen and show you a couple figures and discuss the index system. Can you see that figure? Okay. So as Daniel indicated earlier, there is an index system already in the GRAT. And this index system was developed by LandIQ, and sort of the Beta zone properties were based largely on the CVHM model. And it was a valley-wide kind of data gathering and index. This is the index system is generally on a coarse scale. And when we were initially discussing the GRAT, Sustainable Conservation and Earth Genome, we thought, you know, we have gathered a lot more detailed information in the subbasin as part of the GSP. So is there a way that we can improve the Recharge Suitability Index? And we had a lot of discussions about this, and we decided, yeah, I think that it would be valuable. It would be very valuable to the subbasin to include local data. And so there are three components to this local data that we're going to use. And so Todd is going to be working closely with Sustainable Conservation and Earth Genome to develop what we're calling a Recharge Suitability Index. And the first component of this, which is really the main driver for why we're doing this, is the availability of texture data in the subbasin. This map shows where we have texture data. And there are blue dots and red dots. Each of these dots is a well location or a location in space where we have information on the lithology with depth. The blue dots are from the USGS. The USGS, in development of the Merced model, which encompasses both the Modesto and Turlock subbasins, reviewed over 10,000 boring logs, picked the 3,300 best logs and coded them for lithology based on coarse versus fine grained sediment. Gravel, sand being coarse, silt and clay being fine. And we're lucky to have this data set. We have, in the Turlock Subbasin, there are 1,900 locations where we have this data, where we have this texture data. And thanks to Kevin and John, Eastside Water District has put together their own data set of texture information, and those are the red dots. And there are about 260 locations in the east. And you'll notice on this map that the USGS data kind of stops in the east. And the reason for that is that the Merced model that they developed this information for, kind of the eastern extent of it kind of goes through Turlock Lake. So they weren't interested in what was happening east of Turlock Lake. But we really, really appreciate the work that Kevin and John have done to code logs in the east. And we are going to definitely use that information in addition to the USGS data to help us categorize the textures throughout the subbasin. The second component, so that's the first. There's sort of 3 data sets that are going to go into our Recharge Suitability Index. This is the first one, and again, the driver for why we're doing this. The second is depth to water. As part of the GSP development, we've developed depth to water maps based on measured data as well as model data. There's a C2V Sim subbasin-wide model that is able to simulate groundwater elevations through time in different periods. And so we'll be using both measured and model data to estimate depth to water, which will be used to estimate the thickness of the vadose that we're going to be looking to recharge. And the third data set, I'll just move to this next screen, is soils. We're going to be using the SAGBL soils map developed by UC Davis. But this figure I just wanted to show you is a soils map that we have in the GSP. And I just wanted to show you this because I wanted to point out that most of the subbasin is silty sands, that brownish tan color. But the cross-hatching that you see in the east are hard pan and are restrictive layers. So one challenge that we're going to have in recharging in the subbasin, and I don't think I'm telling you anything you don't already know, is that the eastern subbasin has a lot of restrictive layers, a lot of bedrock near the surface, a lot of dirt pan. So that is something that will obviously be incorporating into the suitability index, which will help, help us develop this tool. So that's all I have. Does anybody have any questions about that? Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Liz.
Yeah, there's no questions for Liz. So are we on to schedule and timeline? Is that what we need to cover next?
Exactly.
Right.
Let me share my screen again.
Kevin's got one question before you start.
Oh, great.
Sites that are improved, what do you do when, plots are turned into basins or recharge fields or things like that? Do you modify the information from Land IQ? What do you do?
Yeah, Kevin, it's a great question. One of the real benefits of having all the data in the system is we constantly update that data. So whether it is crop data changes over time, or whether something got converted from a field to a basin, like we just update it as it actually happens. So we represent the current reality as best as possible.
And the other thing to say is that recharge basins, when they're built, typically you're going to do there'll be some sort of soil assessment or a projection of what sort of infiltration rate will occur there. And that I'm guessing, Liz, you'll have a better estimate of that from this improved site suitability, because we'll need to enter in an infiltration rate for any planned basins that you want to evaluate as part of your scenario GSP actions.
Great. Hey, Liz, can you stop sharing so I can share my screen again?
Oh, sorry about that. Sorry. I'm having technical difficulties. I can't find the screen to unshare. Herb, do you have control of this at all? Ah, sorry, there you go.
I was gonna say I'm looking at it, but you got it.
All right.
Thanks, Liz.
Thanks.
On the process, one of the most important things that we wanted to highlight is getting your input on the exact functionality that's locally most suitable for you. And here are 4 examples on the screen of what we're calling multi-agency functionality, but that's really just jargon for there are many critical stakeholders in the Turlock Subbasin. We want to make sure the tool works in the way that is most helpful for you all. And we are believing that multiple wafer sources are required. So where we get that water could be from multiple different places. I don't think it's going to be as complicated as the work we're doing with DWR in Merced Irrigation District. You know, climate change, reservoir re-ops, multiple rivers, multiple creeks, but there's likely to be some complexity here in the Turlock Subbasin. We know that on-farm recharge may not be for everyone. And so if most of the solutions for you might be in additional ponds or dedicated basins or whatever it may be, we want to build in that functionality so that you can compare different scenarios with different types of solutions. Like Daniel mentioned, some regions may be more or less critical based on local stakeholder input. And so there's been talk of, hey, why don't we optimize one portion of the subbasin over the other, or just trade off and see different scenarios. So we definitely want to allow you to do that. And like the question that Daniel fielded about seasonal, if it's not all 52 weeks, if it's just the winter season, there's some functionality we've been thinking about that we might include as well. So how this will show up to you is we'd love to engage with all of you on getting input into this kind of functionality. So when we build out the version of the tool just for the Turlock Subbasin, it does what you want it to do. And lastly, this is the point about updating the data over time. Let me just quickly turn to the timeline. The bottom answer, the bottom line is 6 months. It's roughly a 6-month timeline. A lot of it is based on 2 things: the data, getting the data. This always takes a fair amount of time, no matter who we're working with, because the data can be off the shelf, but isn't always. In this case, the work that Todd Groundwater, Liz, and team will be doing on the suitability index will play out over. Obviously, we'll need to encompass the input you have on specific functionality. And then we build out the tool, quality assurance, quality control, make sure it's doing what we think it's going to do, and then run scenarios and test everything. So we're targeting a March 2021 timeframe. Fingers crossed that current conditions, COVID pandemic and everything don't prohibit that. And the bottom half here is really, really important, which is just an ongoing pace of frequent meetings, especially within the project team, but to the extent that we can foster getting feedback from the agencies, everyone in the West Turlock and the East Turlock GSAs, and then where appropriate, provide updates to this audience, whether it's the TAC or the GSA meetings. We're happy to provide updates wherever is appropriate. So that's the timeline and the process. Let me pause there and take questions.
No questions for Glenn.
Okay. Thanks, Michael.
No problem. So, do you have any questions in general? I mean, the thing, 6 months, providing data, frequent meetings. Maybe Debbie, you want to talk about, at least for the West Turlock, what we were thinking in terms of creating a subgroup of the TAC to work with Earth Genome Sustainable Conservation.
Yeah, so what we talked about at the last TAC meeting was to perhaps consider developing some type of an ad hoc committee or work group to enable a smaller group of people to kind of work on a day-to-day basis, week-to-week basis with the consultant team to develop the GRAT and then report back to the TAC on the specifics on how it's going, and reach out to stakeholders within the GSAs for information on facilities and other things, and to kind of do some of the legwork that might be needed as we move through this process. Thinking that perhaps the entire TAC is a bit unwieldy to try to schedule meetings and what have you to facilitate that type of a work process. So that was the idea. So we were going to reach out to the TAC agencies on the West Turlock side to see who was interested in participating in an ad hoc committee, and we could go from there. Does that make sense? Michael, did you have anything else to add?
No, nothing to add other than maybe Tara and I will send an email out after this meeting, and then email back to me and see if you're interested, and then we'll figure out how many people are involved. And obviously we want to get a range of agencies and interests, but we don't want to make a group so big that it slows everything down. I think obviously we have the monthly TAC meetings. We'll report back to the TAC about what's going on, but to be nimble, to be responsive, I think it's important to get a smaller working group, as Debbie suggested. So look for an email from Tara and I later today or early next week. And Kevin, I think on the east side had to leave. I just saw the chat. So I'll follow up with Kevin, see what the east side wants to do. When are we looking to get started? I know we've already, at least in Turlock Irrigation District, we started pulling data together and that type of thing. So Glenn, you're ready to go right now?
Yeah, our team is ready. And really it starts with the data, but Debbie's comment about the work group, that sounds completely appropriate. And we want to make sure everyone's in at the beginning, and so we can bring them along from the start.
Right. Obviously, the quicker we get going, the sooner we find out about potential projects, which then tie into preparing the GSP. We're a little bit behind on the GSP. The sooner we come up with some ideas and projects, I think that will be good.
Well, ideally, over the next 6 months, as we're developing the GRAT, we can identify some of those concepts and ideas, and then they could be incorporated into the proposed projects that could then be used to run the GRAT. So that'll be helpful, I think.
Agreed. Okay, with that, I look at my agenda. I see we're kind of at the end there. Anything else for the good of the order before you put the booze in the blender? Yeah, I honestly didn't.
It is Friday
afternoon. 5 o'clock yet, people. It's not 5 o'clock yet. People. Come on.
Not far.
Michael, this is Miguel. I just have one clarification on the data.
Yes, sir.
TID is already providing data. Has an official data request already been made, or is that forthcoming? Or was that something that was done today with the screenshots they were showing of the type of data?
I think it was early stuff, Miguel, getting locations of district facilities, canals, that type of thing, just to kind of give them a head start. It wasn't any kind of hydrology data. Debbie, do you know any more on that?
Yeah, so when we found out that we were going to get the grant, I asked Glenn to provide us an initial list of the types of information that would be needed, recognizing that we cover a large swath of at least the West Turlock Subbasin and have quite a few facilities and what have you. And so it might be a larger lift for us than perhaps some of the smaller entities. And so that's where that is. We're going to need to reach out to all the agencies, but we also have information that Todd Groundwater has developed over time for the GSP, and so we want to leverage that as well, and didn't want to have to reach out again to the agencies and have them provide information again that we may already have. And so we're trying to kind of maximize all of the available resources before asking agencies to do a bunch of work. that perhaps they've already done. Does that
Thank
answer
you.
your question, Paul?
Yes.
Okay, anything else from anybody? Seeing not, thank you for a great turnout on a Friday afternoon. I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you all. Really looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's an exciting project and nice to sink our teeth into something substantial like this. So thank you, Sustainable Conservation and Blue Raster. Look forward to working with you.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you.
Okay, with that,
Thank you all.
our meeting never really kicked off because we didn't have a quorum, although Leandra did join later. But as it never was an official meeting of the West Turlock Subbasin, there's no need to adjourn. The east side, I don't know if you still have a quorum. If Brody or Dennis could adjourn your meeting, we can hang up.
Yeah, I don't believe we have a quorum anymore because Kevin dropped off, but I can go ahead and still move to adjourn the meeting.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody.
Great.
And
thank you all.
We'll see you next time.